All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to get into something really cool, decoding conduction blocks on an ECG. And look, we're going to go way beyond just basic pattern recognition. The goal here is to really start thinking like the heart's own electrical system, to understand the story it's trying to tell us, one vector at a time. So here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to map out the heart's, let's call it electrical superhighway, and figure out what normal traffic looks like. Then we'll start investigating what happens when roadblocks show up, first on the right side, then the left, and we'll even look at some of the smaller side streets. And then, at the end, we'll pull it all together for the big takeaway. So I want you to imagine the heart's conduction system as this perfectly engineered network of high-speed cables, right? Its whole job, its entire purpose, is to deliver an electrical signal almost instantaneously to every single part of the ventricles. And why? To make sure you get a really powerful synchronized contraction. And that's the exact question we're diving into. When you get a roadblock, it's called an intraventricular conduction defect. And what happens is the electrical signal is forced to take a detour. Now here's the amazing part. This slower, abnormal path leaves behind a set of very specific, totally logical clues on the ECG. Our job is to find them. Okay. But before we can even begin to spot these detours, we absolutely have to know the main route by heart. Makes sense, right? So let's establish our baseline. We need to look at the normal, unimpeded flow of electricity through the ventricles first. All right, the key here is that we can actually simplify this whole complex electrical event. You know, this process of depolarization where all the heart muscle cells fire. We can boil it down to four main movements. We call these vectors. So first, you have vector 1, which zips from left to right across the septum. Then, vectors 2 and 3. That's the big squeeze of the main ventricular walls. And finally, vector 4 is just that last little bit of the left ventricle firing off. You add these four movements together, and bam, that's what creates the classic QRS complex you see on a normal ECG. All right, let's throw our first wrench in the works. We'll start with our first block and see how a delay on that right side highway changes literally everything. Okay, so here's your first major clue. This is the absolute starting point for diagnosing any significant delay. You have to look for a widened QRS complex. If it's wider than 0.12 seconds, and that's just 3 of those tiny little squares on the ECG paper, that is a crystal clear signal that the electrical journey through the ventricles is taking way too long. And here's exactly why it's taking longer. In a right bundle branch block, we'll just call it RBB, the initial activation is perfectly normal. I mean, vectors 1 and 2, which are the septum and the left ventricle firing, they happen right on schedule. But because that right side highway is blocked, the signal has to finish up with the left ventricle, and then it has to travel slowly, literally from cell to cell, all the way over to the right side. This late, slow activation is what's shown by vectors 3 and 4 here. And this is just a brilliant illustration of how those late vectors actually show up on the ECG. So if you look at lead V1, which is sitting right over the right ventricle, what do you see? You see a small initial R wave, an S wave, and then this big second R wave. We call it R prime. That's created by that late electricity finally moving toward it. Now on the flip side in lead V6 over on the left, that same late signal is moving away, and that creates a deep, wide S wave. Okay, let's just summarize this. Here's your diagnostic checklist for RBBB. First, you need a wide QRS. Second, you got to find that classic RSR prime pattern in V1. Third, look for those broad S waves out in the lateral leads. And fourth, you're probably going to see some related changes in the T waves too. If you hit all those marks, you can be pretty darn confident in the diagnosis. All right, time to apply this to a real-world ECG. First things first, check the QRS width. Yep, definitely wider than 3 small squares. Now, let's find lead V1. And there it is. See it? That classic RSR pattern, what some people call the rabbit ears. And finally, just glance over to V6 and you can totally spot that slurred, wide S wave. It's a perfect match for the vector model we just talked about. So, what happens when the block is on the other side, on the bigger, more electrically dominant superhighway on the left? Well, as you can imagine, this creates an even more dramatic rerouting of the entire signal. With a left bundle branch block, or LBBB, the entire game changes right from the get-go. You know that initial left-to-right septal vector we talked about? It's just gone. Instead, the impulse has to travel down the right side first, and then the entire wave of electricity has to spread slowly again, cell by cell, from the right all the way over to the left, across the whole heart. And what does that mean? It means all the major electrical forces are now pointing leftward, and therefore away from the right-sided leads. And this complete reversal, it creates a really dramatic pattern on the ECG. Think about it. In lead V1, since all the electricity is moving away from it, what you see is this deep, wide, negative complex. But in V6, which is watching that entire wave come straight at it, you get a broad, tall, and almost entirely positive R wave. We call that a monophasic wave, because it's pretty much all going in one direction. So let's put together our LBB checklist. You're looking for, number 1, a wide QRS. Then you need those tall monophasic R waves in the lateral leads, and you also need to see deep negative complexes in leads like V1. And, just like with RBB, you fully expect to see secondary ST and T wave changes that kind of point in the opposite direction of the main QRS. Take a look at this 12 lead. You can immediately see the wide, kind of bizarre-looking QRS complex. Now zero in on V1, V2, and V3. Notice those deep, wide QS complexes? Okay, now shift your eyes over to the lateral leads, like I and V6. And what do you see? Those dominant, broad R waves. It's a textbook picture of LBBB, and is all explained by that simple right-to-left vector model we just went over. All right, let's get even more granular now, because it gets more interesting. The left bundle branch, it isn't just one single cable. It actually splits into 2 smaller pathways. We call these fascicles. You can just think of them as side roads off the main highway. And you guessed it, these can get blocked too. Now, here's what's so interesting about these fascicular blocks. They don't usually widen the QRS that much. Instead, their main effect is to drastically shift the overall direction of the electrical current, and that's what we call the axis. So, if you block the anterior fascicle, which is what you see on the left, it forces the entire axis up and to the left. But if you block the posterior fascicle, shown on the right, it forces it down and to the right. Okay, and this is where a really deep understanding starts to pay off. You can absolutely have more than one block at a time. So if you get a block of 2 of the 3 main pathways, that's the right bundle, the left anterior fascicle, and the left posterior fascicle, that's what we call a bifascicular block. Let's just look at a classic combination here. First, go to V1. What do you see? You can spot those rabbit ears of a right bundle branch block. But don't stop there. Now, look at the limb leads. Do you see how the axis is pointing way up and to the left? That's a left axis deviation. So these aren't 2 separate problems. You have to put them together. And when you do, you have a single diagnosis, a bifascicular block. Specifically, it's RBB combined with a left anterior fascicular block. Okay, so we've walked through the normal pathway. We've seen how roadblocks on the main highways and even on the little side roads create these really distinct patterns on the ECG. So what's the final, most crucial point to take away from all of this? Is the goal here just to memorize a huge list of criteria and, try to match the pattern you see to the one in your textbook? And here it is, the final, most important takeaway. True mastery here isn't about memorizing patterns, it's about understanding the pathways. I really mean that. If you can visualize the normal vectors and then just logically work out how a block would change them, you can diagnose any conduction delay you come across. Because, see, the patterns, they're just the consequence. The pathways, they're the cause. And that is the ultimate key.